Leite. And on Facebook, I'm David Joseph Leite, Leite. And I answer everything. So people leave comments, I answer all the time.
David, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on The Brighter Side today. It was a really amazing story, and I bet you our listeners are very interested and are not going to forget about Notes on a Banana.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
More of The Brighter Side coming up next on 90.3 WHPC.
You know what really gets a party started? Indoor baseball. Yeah, just find a broom or a pool cue, and you can use like anything as a ball. Cans, bottles, shoes.
Hey, bro, toss me that avocado.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb, but if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving, the ultimate party foul. Learn more at ultimatepartyfoul.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to The Brighter Side on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I am your host, Sarah Albertson. Our next guest is Dr. Michelle Stevens. Michelle Stevens is a psychologist who is the founder and director of Post-Traumatic Success, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and inspiring those affected by psychological trauma. Michelle Stevens wrote the book Scared Selfless, where she tells her life story of how she was a survivor of child sex abuse and how she wants to make a difference by publishing this book and opening about her story. Michelle, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. So do you want to start off by telling us what your book's about?
Sure. My book is about my journey from being abused in a child sex ring and trafficked to the mental illness that it created, to my attempts to heal from that mental illness and overcome it, and ultimately to thrive as a psychologist who now helps other people.
So what made you want to take your story and put it in a book and share it with others? Because, you know, you've been through a lot, and sometimes it's hard to open up to others.
It is, and I think that that's a hallmark of trauma at the beginning, is that, you know, when people are traumatized, whether it's through child abuse or being raped as an adult or being assaulted, being in a war, one of the hallmarks of trauma is that you don't want to talk about it. People try to isolate themselves and think that they can just sort of put it away and never think about it again. But that doesn't really work. When we are traumatized, we tend to develop a lot of predictable symptoms. You know, we get depressed, we feel anxious, we may have trouble trusting other people, we sometimes develop PTSD and things like that. And so the only way to really effectively get over traumatic situations is to talk about them and to reach out to other people who can offer empathy. And so over time, I had a very active healing process that lasted about 15 years. And so that, you know, after all of that, based on my knowledge as a psychologist and my own personal journey, I knew I had a lot of information that I could share with others to help them understand themselves. And so that's why I wanted to publish the book.
Your childhood was taken away from you at the age of 8, and you said now that it took about 15 years for you to begin the healing and to really start feeling better. So, like, when was it, at the exact moment or exact age, that you said, I'm going to take my life back and I'm going to change it around from everything that you've been through?
You know, I think that, honestly, from a very early age, probably in my teens, I made a decision that, and it was really a decision based on anger. I was very angry about the abuse I had suffered, and I sort of made a decision that I wasn't going to let it ruin the rest of my life. You know, so many people who suffer abuse or traumatic situations may fall into self-destructive things like alcohol or drug abuse or promiscuity. There's all sorts of things that happen when you've been abused. But I decided I wanted to try to be constructive. And so I went on a very active journey to try to heal from this. It wasn't easy, but I was very determined that I was going to get over this because I truly believe that living well is the best revenge.
You know, in your book, you talked about how you were locked in a cage and that how you were used as a sex slave at such a young age. At 8 years old, I mean, it's hard because you were very young. You were still developing and maturing in your own ways. Do you remember how your 8-year-old self dealt with everything?
You know, when I first was abused, one of the ways that abusers, any kind of person who's trying to be a tyrant, one of the ways that they gain control over other people is through violence. They use very severe violence at the beginning because what that does is sort of paralyzes the victim. The same way that a deer gets caught in headlights when it's afraid, that happens to human beings. If they are absolutely terrified and they can't fight or flee, they sort of freeze up. And that's sort of how I felt at the beginning. I was just so terrified that I became sort of emotionally numb to what was happening to me.
How long after your healing process did you decide to become a psychologist?
Becoming a psychologist actually was sort of the end of my healing process. So when I first started trying to heal, I was in my early 20s. And, you know, I went from therapist to therapist to therapist and wasn't really getting what I needed. So I started taking it upon myself to try to learn everything I could learn about child abuse and psychological trauma. I was reading constantly, trying to figure out why I had so many mental health problems. And so by the time I was in my early 30s, I really was already an expert in psychological trauma. And at that point, I decided to go back to school and become a doctor so that I could help other people in a more formal way.
You've been through a lot as a child, and like you perfectly said in your book that, you know, your childhood was pretty much stolen from you, and now here you are today. And no child should have to ever go through this. They shouldn't have to go through any of that, the sex ring, none of that. It's just not, humane. But do you think if you didn't go through all that and you didn't go through these challenges that you would be a different person today?
Without a doubt. And, of course, no child should have to go through any kind of abuse. Obviously, my abuse was very severe, but no matter what sort of abuse you go through in childhood, it's damaging. And obviously, would I have preferred to have a happy childhood? Yes. But at this point in my life, I actually can feel gratitude for what happened to me because it did make me who I am now. I was able to heal, and I'm able to use my experiences and my knowledge and the empathy it gave me now to help others. And so it really gave me a life's purpose.
You said you're a mother now, correct?
I am. I have a 12-year-old son.
So I don't know if you have yet or if it's coming up. One day, your son might want to know about your past. How would you approach this topic with him?
Yeah, I've tried to approach it in an age-appropriate way. I certainly don't want to burden him with the story of what happened to me. So when the book was coming out, obviously I knew he needed to know something. So he knows that I was abused in childhood, and we leave it at that.
So I guess as he gets older, maybe you'll just continue on to explain more to him.
Yeah, and, I think it will be enough with him, at some point he'll understand that I was maybe sexually abused, but I don't think anyone needs to know those details when it's your mother.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah.
So how did you handle your post-traumatic stress disorder?
Boy, that is such a tough disorder, and anybody listening who suffers from that, or all the things around it, depression, anxiety, PTSD, there's a whole bunch of things that develop as a result of trauma. So difficult. And you have to actively try to heal from it. You can't just live with it. And by actively heal, one of the things I have noticed, particularly about PTSD, people try to manage the symptoms, the physical symptoms, right? So with PTSD, there's lots of physical symptoms. There's nightmares, you feel jittery, you feel on edge all the time. People want to take the pills to try to manage those symptoms, but they don't necessarily want to do the talk therapy to work through the existential issues. And you have to. When you've been traumatized, you have a lot of existential issues to work through. Why did this happen? How can people be like that? How could God let this happen? These issues have to be worked through. And I think that any person who suffers trauma needs to do some sort of active work to talk about what happened to them so that they can sort of come to terms with it.
I understand that you run a non-profit. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Sure. As part of my mission, I went on a mission to I've been a therapist for 10 years. Then I decided that I really wanted to use my knowledge and my experience to help as many people as possible, part of that was publishing this book, which gives so much information and hope to survivors. And then I also started a charity called Post-Traumatic Success. And a big component of the charity is an online website where we offer all sorts of articles and videos and information and resources so that people who want to know more about healing from abuse or what abuse does to people, anything like that, can go there to find more information.
Could you provide us with that web address?
Sure. It's post-traumaticsuccess.com.
How do you market that?
I was going to say people can also go, it might be easier, to scaredselfless.com. And from there, that's my personal website. There's lots of information and a link to the charity's website.
Can they buy your book off that website as well?
They can find a link to buy the book on the website, and it's at Amazon and every bookstore.
Just to begin to wrap things up, what would be the most important life lesson you learned out of your difficult challenge as a kid?
The life lesson that I learned in this journey that I've been on was that, first and foremost, when terrible things happen to you, you have to accept that it probably does do some damage to you, but that it's absolutely possible if you actively try, you can heal from whatever you suffered from. And in doing so, you can come out a better person than before this happened to you. It's absolutely possible.
What advice would you give somebody that is just starting their healing process with post-traumatic syndrome, or just, any healing process from just going through a really tough time?
I would say that first and foremost, you need to make the decision that you are going to heal fully, that you are going to do whatever it takes to take care of yourself so that you can be 100% again. And that's not always easy because it's painful, it's hard to find good help, it takes time and energy, but it's so important. You're worth it. You're worth it. You can become a fully fulfilled person again if you take yourself and your own healing seriously.
Were you ever in denial about anything?
I suffered from repressed memory, which is not quite denial. It was my mind's way of just keeping it from me. I suffered from repressed memory for several years during my childhood until I started to have the memories.
How did you handle that?
The memories just started coming out on their own, which happens to people. I tried very hard not to be in denial about things. There may have been times when I was in denial about how much it had affected my character until I was able to heal. Sometimes people who go through traumatic childhoods are not such nice people in adulthood, and you have to face that and work on that as well.
I just want to say you have a really fantastic story, and I admire your strength to, want to come out and want to speak about it and to continue advocating against child abuse. I think it's really amazing. I sincerely mean that. Can you just tell our listeners one more time where they can find out information about your non-for-profit and where they can buy your book, Scared, Selfless, My Journey from Abuse and Madness to Surviving and Thriving?
Right, Scared Selfless. You can get it on Amazon, or if you type in Scared Selfless, scaredselfless.com will pop up. That's my website, and from there, there's all sorts of information and information on getting to the charity as well.
I want to thank you, Michelle, again for joining us on The Brighter Side today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to The Brighter Side on 90.3 WHPC. Today, our guest is Michelle Stevens, Scared, Selfless, My Journey from Abuse and Madness to Surviving and Thriving. We thank you for listening.